First, so let's bring in Andrew Clennell, our political editor. And it was a big part of the campaign. And now the government says they've delivered, although, of course, it was a decision by the Fair Work Commission, Andrew.
That's right, Kieran. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese said this during the election campaign about a minimum wage rise keeping pace with inflation. Back then, inflation was 5.1%.
Does that mean you would support a wage hike of at least 5.1% just to keep up with inflation?
Absolutely.
After the election, he and his minister Tony Burke backed it up with a submission calling for the wage to rise at the same rate as inflation. So this is the Fair Work President Ian Ross, a former Assistant Secretary of the ACTU, today with the wage decision.
Taking all the relevant considerations into account, we have decided to award an increase of $40 per week to the national minimum wage, which amounts to an increase of 5.2%. This level of increase will protect the real value of the wages of the lowest paid workers.
A 5.2% rise, 4.6% for relevant awards. The PM welcomed the decision in Gladstone after a cabinet meeting today.
At the heart of the election campaign, I was asked whether I would welcome a decision by the Fair Work Commission to increase the minimum wage by just $1. And today they have done just that. And when I was asked would I welcome a decision, I said absolutely. And I absolutely welcome today's decision.
Relations Minister Tony Burke went even further, claiming credit.
The era of wages being kept deliberately low by the Liberal and National parties effectively came to an end today. People will be seeing in their bank accounts what the change of government means.
And in a statement from the PM Treasurer and IR Minister, the government said, quote, "This is a great result for these workers, but it's only the beginning. The government is determined to get wages moving again." ACTU President Sally McManus says the decision will affect a quarter of Australian workers. It is difficult to see how the Fair Work Commission could have done much else with inflation where it is. Reserve Bank Governor Philip Lowe speculated last night inflation will reach 7% this year, despite many interest rate rises.
By the end of the year, inflation will get to close to 7%, and we need to chart a course to bring it back down. We're expecting the Australian economy to continue to grow pretty strongly over the next 6 to 12 months. There's still a bounce back from all the COVID restrictions. People have got these savings that I've talked about to draw on, and the current rate of saving is still quite high.
The Reserve Bank Governor seemed to say sorry but not sorry when it came to telling people early in the pandemic that we will not have a rate rise until 2024.
Yeah, I understand that people made borrowing decisions based on our communication, and people took out loans that they may not have otherwise taken out. But the overall picture, which is really very much the focus of the Reserve Bank, is a pretty resilient economy.
And he seemed to admit that the Reserve Bank and former government might have gone too far pump priming the economy, but compared it to insurance.
The other thing we wanted to do was provide some insurance, some economic insurance for the country, that if these really bad outcomes were going to eventuate, that we would be there, we'd be able to support people. But that's the nature of insurance, isn't it? You take out insurance against a very bad event, the very bad event occurs, and you're very glad you took out the insurance. But the bad event doesn't occur, and then you think, well, I could have saved some money here. I didn't need all this insurance. My view is that broadly the country got it right.
The Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry have said the wage decision today will cost business $8 billion a year, and they already have to cope with the 0.5% rise in the superannuation guarantee from July. ACTU President Sally McManus says company profits are going up significantly, and it's about time workers saw some of that.
It's not as if businesses are suffering at the moment. They're not. Their profits are up 20%, 20%. If we had have won the 5.5%, that would have equated to 1% of their profits, a small amount.
The decision comes on a day that it was reported that politicians received a pay rise of 2.75%. It probably also means that there is likely to be some unrest in the public sector, including in New South Wales, where the state government recently announced It was lifting its wages cap of 2.5% to just 3%. There have been talks about teachers' strikes and the like.
So the big question here, can we avoid a recession, Andrew?
We might get lucky and inflation calms down next year after rate rises and doesn't blow up the economy. But it is starting to look tougher to avoid a downturn, and here are some of the reasons why. Rate rises can stop people spending and borrowing and buying homes, but they won't make gas or petrol cheaper, or construction materials and other materials reliant on supply chains cheaper. Also, the last two recessions we have had or nearly had in Australia, during the GFC and COVID, massive government stimulus managed to get us out of the hole. You can't do that in a high inflation environment. The concern is we might have or end up with a stagflation situation like the 1970s and 1980s. Governor Lowe seemed confident last night we would avoid recession, but he was also confident we would not see rate rises until 2024. No doubt Treasurer Jim Chalmers is relying on the Governor's advice and the advice of Treasury, and made a comment which I wondered could haunt him in the next year or two at our Sky News Economic Outlook Forum last week. He basically says here that he has not the faintest concern about a recession occurring.
That's not on my list of fears for our domestic economy. If you want to think about the challenges around the world, and you think about, a lot of commentators that many of you would read fear a recession in the US or the UK. Their fears there are about inflation getting out of control, central banks having to react so substantially that instead of tapping the brakes, they slam the brakes on those big economies. And so that's of concern to us, to be upfront about it.
Now, let's look to the strain on the one other sector within the economy, that being the energy sector, and the relevant minister, Chris Bowen, out there trying to reassure people again today that the regulator's onto it.
Energy Minister Chris Bowen, as he seems to have to every day this week, giving public comment today, assuring people that the Australian energy market operator is making sure that Australians do not suffer blackouts as the strain on the energy supply from the cold snap and coal-fired outages continues.
Yesterday, AEMO directed more than 5,000 megawatts into the market. Using their powers, they directed generators to bid into the market and to generate more than 5,000 megawatts across the national energy market. As I said, AEMO advises that the situation continues to remain, that load shedding and blackouts are unlikely.
The minister there also suggesting there may be further recommendations for action from AEMO amidst reports power companies might be profiting from the crisis, Kieran.